Okay, if you can see that I'm visibly sweating, it's because I am. And that's just the nature of summer, and I've been doing enough things tonight that my blood is pumping, not in like a bad way, and actually I've done physical work, so still cooling down from that. I am back again. Here we are. You know who it is. Well, you know. But welcome to the new subscribers, by the way. I appreciate it. I appreciate the willingness to stick around, and so it's nice to meet you. Feel free to comment, like, whatever you want to do, and hope you enjoy these videos. They're going to be kind of a mix of things, including today, which is actually going to be more about a brief story, my experience with September 11th of 2001 and what it was like for me. Honestly, it's not that long of a story. It's just something that I want to record so that I can remember what I remember. And I'm sure if I would have done this 10 years ago, it would be a little bit more vivid. But I just wanted to at least do it and kind of do it in this form. I know it's long and it's kind of drag a little bit because I'm not going to use editing. Just want to share it and put it out there for myself to remember, and maybe you to remember, and it might connect to your experience. You may have a similar experience depending on your age, because a lot of factors came into how people experience this. Now, I grew up in western central North Carolina, and went to a smaller private school where my mom was a teacher. And so actually for me, when it came to September 11th was a normal Tuesday in my life. At this point, I was 12 years old in 2001, which seems like forever ago. And I know for some of you, you're watching this and you're like, oh my goodness, I was an adult, I was at work, or whatever. And some of you were babies, or not born yet. A lot of you watching this probably weren't born yet. And so, you've just seen what's on YouTube, and you've seen sort of these tributes, or maybe you've seen some of the kind of the National Geographic, like looking into the situation of, the planes and, some of the stories that came from this event. I am just going to share from my perspective, because you've seen the footage. You can look at that. You can watch all angles. You can see the documentaries. A lot has come out since this event, and because of its time in history, while everyone didn't have a cell phone perspective per se, there was a lot of recording of this event than with a lot of other historical events. So you can see the footage, but I'm just going to share my perspective. So anyway, it's a normal Tuesday. I'm in 7th grade. It's the beginning of my 7th grade year. I'm 12 years old at this point, and I am in a health class in the morning. And I honestly, I'm not sure what class it was. It may have been a math class. I remember the classroom. I remember where I was sitting, because it was early in the morning. For us, the announcement came over the loudspeakers. It was somewhere between around maybe, I want to say it was the first or second period. So it must have been around 9 a.m. that we got the announcement over the loudspeakers, the all school speakers. And essentially the principal just stopped everything and said it outright, just said, hey, let's stop, and we're going to remember and take a moment of silence and even pray for the people that are going through this in New York City. And he said that the World Trade Centers had been attacked. And honestly, at this point at my age, I didn't know what he was talking about. He said New York City. I knew about New York City. He said the World Trade Centers, and other people were saying the Twin Towers. I had no idea what that meant. So for me, it was all imagination, and they said that it had just been attacked. And so at that point, it was kind of daunting, but it wasn't really affecting my day. It didn't really connect to me. It just so happened that there were some older students that had actually taken a trip to New York City not that long before, like that summer before September 11th. And so there were some people that were really, there were some of the high school students. Again, I'm in middle school, but some of our classes in a lot smaller private school, you know, you've only got we have a couple floors. And so I'm on the upper floor for this class, so I could see and hear students, but obviously I didn't have classes with the older students. It was a small school. But some of them were very upset, crying, you know, and emotional. Some of the adults were emotional. And we got a couple more announcements. So as the morning went along, for me, I'm in class and they tried to say, hey, we're going to try to keep going along. A couple of my friends were pulled out of school and taken home early. Some people were getting off, and it turns out later that because of proximity, there's the main pipelines for fuel along the East Coast pass through Greensboro, North Carolina. Fun fact, that was pretty close to where my school was. And so there were questions of whether that would be attacked, because in a terrorist attack, all these specific sensitive areas get put on lockdown. And some people believe that if that was attacked, I mean, that would be almost, I mean, I don't want to exaggerate here, but it would be nuclear level as far as the damage it could cause to that area of the country where I was at. So some people were taken out of schools, understandably. Some people knew people in New York City. So friends were leaving through the day, adults were making calls, you know, the principal's office and stuff, where there was access to TV, people were watching TVs and listening to the radio. It was kind of one of those days that everyone went through the day, kind of through the motions. Even as a 12-year-old, I could just see that, you know, in middle school, kind of everyone's just going through the motions, but really thinking about someone else. I think that's common for a lot of younger people, and even adults, you know, who are at work. I mean, how do you focus? How do you focus on what you're supposed to do when something like this happens? Even for me, who didn't understand really what was happening. So I do remember going through the day. I do remember emotional people. I do remember kind of getting these updates, because they said, oh, well, there's been another plane that's gone down, right? And as the updates are coming, the Pentagon's been attacked, and they think that the White House might be attacked. And, you know, there's sort of these presumptions made, and who knows what could have happened. And again, there's a lot of speculation now, and they've, excuse me, done some research. But my experience was just more of watching other people and seeing how it changed the tone of the day. And for me, most of my experience of the day was once I got home, honestly. I mean, I still remember the classroom. I remember the teacher, Mr. Hearn was his name, who was our teacher at that moment. I remember the classroom I was sitting in, where I was sitting. It was that emotional of a moment that I can still remember it, what it looked like. You know, I was sitting in the middle of the room. I was like, he was in the front of the room. The announcements came over. It's really crazy that my memory can go back to that moment. And, you know, spotty through the day, but I remember going home, and when we got home, there were no after school activities, there was no sports practices that day. And I remember going and just sitting there. My mom turned on the TV and just started watching, and I started watching. And just to share a little bit of my experience, my parents were very cautious, and sometimes to a degree that I didn't agree with at times in my life. That's for a whole nother video. But for some reason, they thought that it was okay that my brother and I, if we were interested, that we could watch. We could see the loops happen on the news. Because, I mean, the news was just, this is all the news was for weeks. And it started then around 8-something a.m. and went all through the day. So all the news channels were on loop. So our TV was on pretty much for the next couple of days. And I just remember as a 12-year-old sitting there, and my parents let me sit in front of the TV. That's all I did all afternoon, all evening, was just watch it. Sometimes my mom was there. Sometimes my dad was there. Sometimes it was just me and my brother. My brother would lose interest, or he'd see it, and, you know, he was 10 at the time. I mean, and I just kept sitting there and watching. And you know, and I think this is something to say too, and this is where I have learned something as a parent, that kids can't distinguish what they see on TV from real life as well as adults can. They don't compartmentalize like an adult, fully developed mind can. And so for me, in a way, it was like being there. It was like experiencing it. I was feeling the strongest emotions sitting on a couch in the basement of my house with a TV on and asking questions, not really understanding why would someone do this? What's really happening here? I mean, just you're seeing really intense footage because I mean at this point the news crews of New York City are just pointing their cameras in and then they're playing that over and over again, and there's being updates, and now there's other planes crashing in other parts of the country and they're trying to get updates on that and getting stories from that. It's just a really emotional time. And that evening, I do remember watching a lot of it, seeing some of those clips for the first time. I mean, these are clips that you can now find, but I was watching because people would send in videos that, a tourist was taking a video of the World Trade Centers and then the plane fly. I mean, one of the ones I vividly remember, which you can find online, of course, you can find here on YouTube, is when someone was driving across one of the bridges, I believe. I'm not sure which one. And what they were, here's the perspective, I guess. And it was kind of this whole, here's, they're looking at the towers, and then the plane just came right over the camera and went straight into one of the towers, one of the World Trade Centers. And seeing that for the first time, that was hard, intense, knowing that those planes were full. I'm watching hundreds of people die, knowing that there's no hope for those people, and you hope that there's hope for people that are in the building. You don't know what's going on there. And just seeing the intensity of that, seeing the pictures of the people once the buildings fell, running for their life and navigating the smoke, navigating the dust and debris and all that came from that. Those are really hard images to watch. And that impacts, that leaves a mark on anyone's heart, including mine. And so I was barely, I will admit, I was barely old enough, but just old enough. Like I said, a lot of things, some of our most impressionable events in our lives happen during middle school. That's usually where we feel the most nostalgic parts of our life come usually out of middle school. And that's where we really have those first experiences, the first we're independent. I mean, I don't want to go into the whole middle school thing, but it's such a sensitive time, and that's when this happened for me. I didn't have anything to compare it to. This was the first thing like that had happened. And so here I was in North Carolina, completely disconnected. I didn't know anybody in the World Trade Centers. I'd never been to New York City, but I was learning all of this through this event and understanding what these terms meant, understanding that there were terrorists, understanding that people would do this to other people, and really having to grow up in some ways, at least in my mind and emotionally. So that was an impressionable, I was an impressionable kid going through this in that way. So that's what I remember. I know it's more of chunks, but was most of my experience. And so I ended up going back to school the next day. There were some people that didn't, and it was just the updates. And again, you go home and the news was like this for a couple weeks, and it was intense, and it was hard, and there was a lot, and it did not go away, and I think I couldn't fully appreciate it. And as time went on, I think I kind of moved on, but the country didn't move on, not for a long time. And in some ways, I hope that the country doesn't move on, and that we remember that, and remember that there was such a unifying effect of such a terrible, tragic event, that really had no bias to religion, right? Because this was extremism. This wasn't about religion. This wasn't about race. This wasn't about money, and status. This had no bias. This event was just America, right? This was about America. And so being an American 12-year-old, it has that effect because that was an attack on my country, my people. and my people was everyone here, right? And so, if any of that makes sense, I think it's a win. But that was my experience when it came to September 11th. I still try my best. My girls aren't old enough to understand it in a way I don't want them to understand it. I've talked to them. I briefly shared what day it was, but honestly, they can wait a little while before they have to really understand some of the dark parts of the dirty, the kind of the ugly parts of this world. And that's hard as a dad, now that I am a dad. And there will be events in their life that shape how they think, how they see things. That this has affected the millennial generation in a very unique way, because the millennial generation was kind of in this college age students down all the way through elementary aged students at this time, when this event happened, right, and nestled right there in 2001. So we were shaped, we were affected. It affects how we see people, it affects how we see other generations, it affects how we see religion, it affects how we see the world around us, and how we trust and how we don't trust, and what could happen, and stress and anxiety and mental health issues. I mean, it's not all traced back to this event, but I mean, think of just the ripple effects that would have. Not that it comes all back to that one event, but it had a big impact. And I don't know what your story is. Feel free to share it. I'm always very interested. I mean, I'm a fan. I'm no stranger to Casey Neistat and his content. Him sharing his story about being there and actually getting some of that on video there in New York City. He had just moved there. I now have dear friends that were in New York City. They lived in New York City when this was happening, and just the chaos and just how the city had to shut down for a long time, and everything was disrupted and everything was emotional, and just talking to them about their story and their experience while they were living there in New York City. But what's your story? How did it affect you? What do you think as we remember those who lost their lives, as we remember those who served? Because that's really what the remembrance is about. It's about the people who showed courage, showed bravery, showed unity, right? And celebrating that and looking forward to that and seeing what that can teach us now. But what was your experience? Was it the same? Did you have a personal connection? Did you not really remember it? Has your impression only been, I mean, a lot of my impression was on TV, but it was in the moment. What was yours? So I'd love to hear that. Love to see your comments. And thanks for listening to this long story. But I just figured I would share what I can remember now, because one of these days I'll remember even less. And I think just understanding that there's different perspectives, and this is just one of millions of perspectives of how this day affected my life. So thanks for watching again, and look forward to seeing you soon.